You're listening to episode 91 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Laura Martin speaks with us about building a community of mindfulness-based stress reduction teachers of the Pacific Northwest. If you're a mindfulness teacher or thinking of becoming one, you may run into some challenges with peer interaction. Not the interaction itself, but simply finding peers, locating the community of those fellow teachers. In some areas, small groups are stepping up and doing the sometimes challenging work of creating in-person communities for living cultures of mindfulness teachers. Laura Martin, LCSW, has been a social worker since 1993, with broad experience in the field of mental health, working with individuals, couples, and groups. She has been using and teaching skills of mindfulness and meditation for several years, and practicing cognitive behavioral therapies with a client-centered approach. Laura is an instructor of mindfulness-based stress reduction, and her own meditation practice is in the Zen tradition. Our guest today is Laura Martin. Laura, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So glad to be speaking with you, and I'm wondering if you could get us started by having you tell us about your background.
Well, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and most of my career has been in the field of mental health, in community mental health. And I am originally from Illinois, from Southern Illinois. And in working in community mental health, one of my supervisors early on in the mid-90s went to the exotic locale of Seattle. And with her, she brought back some knowledge of a new treatment for people called DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy. And here in the mid-90s, when sort of Rogerian listening and validating kinds of therapies were not very popular, it was all very solution-focused therapy and fix everybody in 6 sessions, cognitive behavioral work, which has its benefits, of course. But bringing back dialectical behavior therapy and seeing that exactly half of the treatment was acceptance and validation. And I had already been working with the population for whom it was designed, people with borderline personality disorder. So it was quite miraculous, actually, to see how effective it was and is, not just in the folks that we were working with, but in ourselves. Benefit from these skills and use these skills. And this set me on a path, actually. My own path to mindfulness was started here. And it did not take me long to realize that if I was going to be teaching mindfulness and DBT, that I sure did need my own practice. So I subsequently moved to Oregon and started working in a rural community mental health agency there. And we basically started a DBT program there. I've never worked at a place that could afford the actual training, although we got lots and lots of consultation from different places who were doing the treatment. We were able to build something that was very, very beneficial to the population that was already coming in, getting to train folks in mindfulness skills, and again, sharpening our own skills in that endeavor. So interestingly, in this rural county in Oregon, a Zen monastery opened. So this is kind of a financially, economically suffering logging area. Mm-hmm. And for a Zen monastery to open there, you might as well have had a spaceship land. But I remember reading in the local paper about it and thought, well, I really should check that out. And so I was pleasantly surprised and welcomed into the Zen community of Oregon and the monastery in Clatskanie, and also there's a Portland center for practice. And this really was so important to deepen my own understanding and get to practice deeply, do retreat practice, work with a teacher, be involved in community, all of it. And it's really from that I feel like I have much of anything to share, but also being able to kind of merge these two traditions, these two ways of offering assistance or these ways of alleviating suffering, that they come together is just remarkable. So I feel very lucky that I get to do this. So I was teaching DBT for a little while, and a friend of mine was going to the MBSR training, the initial one for this 5-day one with John and Saki. And I did not have any intention of becoming an MBSR teacher at all. In fact, I only went because I was having a severe attack of FOMO. I want to go to a thing. So this was in 2007, I think. And it became clear to me that this was a broader application of mindfulness and that had already been figured out. I did not have to reinvent the wheel in this way. Also, I was not required to have a class and a individual therapy relationship and a teacher group. And DBT is really quite specific about who it's for and how it works. But MBSR is kind of for everybody. And so I did that. And I can remember that training. Somewhere in the middle of it, they brought Florence in, and I was just so struck by her way of teaching. I sort of was like, oh, you can do it this way too? Maybe I could do that, maybe. But I also felt that I wasn't ready, and I pretty immediately took the next training, the 9-day one with Florence and Melissa. And then after that, it seemed a little closer to ready, although I still sometimes don't even feel ready. But I had my first class. I call it my friends, family, and hapless victims class. And that was in, I think, 2009. Been teaching ever since and just learning ever since the whole time.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. There are a few things that came to mind as you were speaking. The first was, as you were describing DBT's aspect of acknowledging what's here and acceptance. And it seemed that touches upon one of the principles that you're very familiar with in the MBSR program of there's more right with you than wrong with you. If you're here and not accusing the person who is suffering of being at fault because they're suffering. Is that how it felt to you, or what was that like?
Well, just the way that in that practice, the two words radical acceptance got put together, I think is incredibly powerful. And the practice of radical acceptance, especially in the face of the level of suffering that we encounter in any given DBT program or in just in life,
Mm-hmm.
that this is in fact a radical practice. And I've heard it said that acceptance is the older sister of change. And
Okay.
that in being able to create some space of acceptance, that is transformative somehow in and of itself, and should not be underestimated. I keep rediscovering again and again how important that is. Even though nobody really shows up to an MBSR class or a meditation class or anything, because everything's going so awesome.
Right.
Sit with my mind for 45 minutes because it's going great. And of course, people want something to change, or why are we there? But that we're met with these practices of acceptance, of radical acceptance. I just see time and again how powerful that is.
Yeah. You'd also mentioned that as you described the DBT and then the Zen practice and then going to the tools program, the first one with John and Saki, how these are very different ways of really engaging with how we are in life, what we might experience, dealing with the difficulties that may arise. I'm wondering if you could just unpack for a little bit for you what some of those differences you noticed. What might those have been?
At the trainings?
Between those, what do you notice that are some of the differences?
I mean, again, it seems to be about meeting our life as it is, or I guess in the 12-step, they call it life on life's terms. That this is a gift and a means of tapping into a practice that gives us this ability or helps us recall this ability to just be with our life, to inhabit our life, regardless of its pleasantness or unpleasantness. And in particular, I mean, the practices of acceptance, of mindfulness, when there's nothing else to do, that it gives us something, a way of being with our life, no matter what.
Thank you. So let's talk about this effort, which is what we're really here to chat about, is this mindfulness-based stress reduction teachers of the Pacific Northwest. How did that start? And who are some of your partners on this adventure?
Yeah. This endeavor started, I guess, in some ways when I first started teaching, and I volunteered to obtain some hand-holding, as I called it. We could call it supervision, but I called it hand-holding from Florence when I first started teaching. And I became immediately interested in how are other regions doing this? How are other cities doing this? And the spectrum of cooperation versus competition. Because we are putting this out in the marketplace. And there already were a few MBSR teachers in Portland when I started. And so how do people do this? And Florence told me that it was indeed on the full spectrum. And she pointed to the New York City Collaborative as a fine example of collaboration and intimated that there were some places that are not having quite such a good time. And so I became pretty, I don't know what to say, obsessed, but really this has always been an area of interest to me. If we get to decide where we are on that dial, let's just turn the dial towards the collaborative. And then the question becomes, how do we do that? And frankly, I was met with some initial generosity from Denise Gore, who's another MBSR teacher here in Portland. We met at a MBSR training at Reed College that Florence was giving a little talk there. And she was so generous. She allowed me to sit in on one of her classes, and we shared materials, and she's since become my work wife. So there are just so many ways that we can share this practice. It's such a unique thing that we share. it's not like being a counselor. It's not like being a teacher. It's not like being a Buddhist teacher. It's completely unique.
Mhm.
And so to have other people who share this curriculum and this way of working is so valuable. I found it nothing but valuable. And so she stepped forward to me at a time when I was very anxious about moving into how are people going to find me? How do I get my classes filled? All of those nuts and bolts kinds of questions. And so that enabled me to then approach other people in that same spirit of generosity. And so I taught for a little while, and then went to the TDI in 2014. And it just so happened that there were 8 or 9 people from the Pacific Northwest who were also there. And you know how the TDI is kind of like summer camp. Love everybody at the end, at these trainings. And I mean, it comes from the practice that here we are practicing together so deeply. And it's the same kind of relationship that I've come to experience in my Zen community, that when we just sit together, if you do a week-long silent retreat and the person you're sitting next to, you haven't said a word to them, and yet there's this camaraderie somehow that, you just want to hug them at the end. So to have experienced that with other teachers at the TDI, we ended up scheduling a couple of dinners together while we were there and getting to talk, getting to know one another. And I just, and the other thing about the TDI or retreats like that is you get these group high kind of love fest things, and then it all just disappears.
Yeah, then you leave.
Right. And so I really didn't want that to happen. I saw this as a real opportunity to, what if we could keep this going, kind of was the question. And I immediately thought, well, what if we could just do a retreat together? What if we could just practice together? And I met, I think through a Zen friend of mine, Tim Burnett in Bellingham, Washington. And he and I are cut a bit from the same cloth in that if there's a good idea and we think, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea, let's do another thing. I have absolutely no time for this, but let's do it. So both of us added this to our already overflowing plates with just, blind enthusiasm. And we found a spot pretty centrally located around central coastal Washington. And really the power and the weight of the relationships that we had with other teachers, whether they were those that we had met at trainings or who were more in our local orbits, all the people who attended this first retreat, which was in January, I think 2015. I mean, we, sort of like strong arming some of my friends to come. The way it felt like that, but it really accomplished what it was meant to. Oh, and we also had the benefit of Catherine Polan Orzech, who moved to Oregon. And she had been in Dan Ribel's practice community. She had had the benefit of actually getting to be in a community like this, led by a very mature MBSR teacher. And so she brought a lot of that experience and really helped us put together the schedule for how we would do this first weekend. Also, Kurt Holting in Seattle was someone who was really pretty instrumental early on in founding this teacher community. So yeah, we just kind of made it happen. It was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It went beautifully. And right away we realized, well, we just didn't have enough sitting. A little bit Zen-centric in this group. Yeah. So we, the next year, expanded the time. And so it's like a Thursday night arrival, and then Friday is a silent retreat. But it's not just sitting. We do all of the MBSR practices in silence. And this is the cool thing about it. This was part of the intention, was to make it a potluck retreat, so that it doesn't fall to any one person to be the leader. We have a sign-in sheet for all of the events. And so everybody gets a chance to lead something. And that could be just ringing a bell to begin and end a sitting period. But sometimes it is to lead a yoga practice or something like that. And boy, that's an interesting experience for people to lead an MBSR practice in front of your peers.
Yes.
It's a high, it feels kind of high stakes, but it's also just a really valuable experience. I had this experience when I went to the MBCT training, and they were kind of the leaders there were looking around for folks who maybe had a little bit of teaching experience to lead some yoga or something. So they asked me to lead a yoga practice in front of all these other MBCT folks, and it was terrifying. It was just terrifying, and I said yes. But it was one of the most. It was a really transformative experience for me to get to do that in front of my peers and teachers, and it really helped move me into a place of a little more sturdiness in my own teacher identity, I guess. And so, while people certainly come to we call it the gathering, the retreat, and opportunities for leadership in this way with similar trepidation, and yet it can be such a gift because you also get the benefit of the feedback and the support and the warmth and the understanding of everyone there, and appreciation too. I mean, we all leading and teaching so much, and it is so nice to get to just kick back and let somebody lead a loving kindness meditation for you. Nice that we can give this to each other. And all you have to do is just maybe one thing, but mostly it's receiving from the depths of everyone else's teaching experience. It's just really such a beautiful experience. It's been really, really lovely each time.
So this has been going on then every year since?
Yeah, since 2015. So we're going to be doing our fourth one, I guess, right? Yes, in 2018, in January. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Up on Vashon Island, so I understand it's very beautiful there.
Great. So one of the things I wanted to ask about is, in addition to some of the very positive aspects of what's come up with this, is that I'm wondering if there are some gaps that you and your colleagues have sensed that need to be filled. And I'm wondering about some of the ones, the online presence, for example, that you're growing hope to address, and having these gatherings. What does that fill for you?
Well, we're out here on the West Coast. We're pretty far from Worcester, and we don't have the benefit necessarily. I mean, even Bob Stahl in California, he doesn't come up here so much. So to have the sort of the gravity of a teacher trainer like that, we are basically creating that for ourselves, to create a community around not a person or a organization, but really creating that for ourselves. And what I'm finding is, well, the online presence is very new, and all the way it happened is just at the last gathering at the very end, someone just put up their hand and said, "I'll make the website."
They said yes, didn't they?
Thank you. So that's really all that was needed. That's all it took. And so now, I mean, there's a way that having a website makes it real. But that where the gathering had been housed under the auspices of a couple of different people's mindfulness agencies. I mean, there's a financial outlay that needs to happen in order to reserve a space.
Right.
And it was sometimes a little iffy. You know, people like to keep their options open, and it's hard to commit. And, you know, we had to have X amount of money to actually reserve a space, and then make sure that we had X amount of people. This last gathering occurred during the inauguration. And so, we had some people who decided to march instead. But having a website, and now we are using a dues paying model, so that we are not leaving anybody on the hook for the cost of reserving space. So those are the like nuts and bolts kinds of things that a website and a dues model and those kinds of things can really, those problems that it can address or just solve, help us structure this kind of a thing. What the website, I think, also does, and I hope, is that it will be a way for us to have some regional meetings online and to be able to, my vision is based on the New York City Collaborative. Now, they are a little tighter geographically, so they can meet in person. But, it's a bit of a commute to meet with our friends in Vancouver, BC. So having some online opportunities to meet and talk about the curriculum maybe once a month and dive into what it is that we're doing and how do we deliver the curriculum and what are the things that come up. I think that providing these kinds of opportunities for support for each other, for learning, for mentorship, and it's needed. It's definitely needed.
Absolutely.
And so that, I think, could be a great way for us to connect throughout the year also, not just once a year. Sometimes, it has come to be that I only see some of my Washington MBSR teacher friends in January. And if it weren't for this, I wouldn't see them at all. And so it's a time we have to actually really connect. So it does meet that kind of a need for connection. And just, you get to be with MBSR teachers and you can sit across from somebody at lunch and just launch into some conversation about, so what do you do in week 6? Right? You don't have to provide the background or any of that. It's just wonderful to get to be with our peers.
Yeah, it sounds like that sense of connection, the community. And you mentioned having, I think, not just peers, but mentoring for those who are new to this coming in.
Yeah.
It can be very, very confusing. You've gotten the training to be a teacher, but that's just the area that's necessary. You also need, okay, now where, how, what are the logistics, all of that. And also having someone who has maybe done it a few times provide the training wheels, knowing that you may have your balance just fine, but it's nice to have that initial walk into the warm water instead of splashing in the cold deep end.
Exactly. Or even just a place to describe a difficult class interaction. And there's a lot of MBSR teachers that are just really operating solo and don't have that opportunity. And I personally just can't imagine that. Like, I don't think I could do it that way. I wouldn't want to. And so having and creating a community to share this path is, to me, I am compelled to make this happen.
Totally understand.
I envision that we are perhaps creating a culture of teachers and a culture of our values and our best practices and our ethics, and recalling the importance of maintaining our own retreat practice. And my gosh, I personally, again, I don't know what I would do if I was not going on regular silent retreats a couple times a year. Like, I couldn't function as a teacher effectively. It just I can't even. So to make sure that doesn't get, I know it's difficult for people, and I look around and see the training requirements changing, or not necessarily including that kind of retreat practice. And again, for myself, I could not imagine doing this without that.
Yeah,
so
I think you bring up one of the very important, I think, unique characteristics about being a mindfulness instructor of some kind, not just MBSR and MBCT and other programs that are out there, is that it is so very foundationally dependent on one's own practice and being able to support that practice. It's not a matter of in other professions where you're keeping your license up. Right. It's no, you every day, this is a way of being that you really need to be completely steeped in yourself, or it is not reflected in the teaching that you deliver.
Yeah. I mean, I feel very lucky to have a community that I'm in, and I also, see how that may not be for everybody, the particular kind of community that I get to be in, and so I can also see this being a way to support teachers in the long term. Perhaps we'll have a week-long retreat for MBSR teachers, right? I mean, that may happen. I think that would be wonderful. Yeah, those are how we choose to be as teachers and what we discern as important to the care and feeding of our own practice, the care and feeding of our own teacher development is, I think, something that's getting attention here somehow. And there's a way that, I don't know how to say this. What one thing that we've kind of seen is it's almost a triangle of experienced teachers at the top, and then a lot more teachers who are brand new coming in, and that in a retreat like this or in an organization like this, there has to be something also feeding the teachers who have a little bit more experience. There has to be something that we're getting out of it. Otherwise, it's something different than a peer collaborative. And so even just having a chance to see our teacher friends on a regular basis and just connect in that way can meet that need, I think, for more experienced teachers, or even just to quietly practice together can be really beneficial. It's kind of what the more experienced teachers are going for. But we're learning. We're trying to address all these needs. We're trying to figure out what it is that would attract people, or what it is that teachers are needing at various levels. And so we also have, as well as the silent retreat Friday, then Saturday it's a little more interactive. And we've done some World Cafe kind of interactions where we throw out topics. What are some hot topics? What are things people want to talk about? So can you really make a living as an MBSR teacher was one of them. Or, how do you deal with week 6, or, those kinds of things. And if it's a question that's of interest to you, one person just agrees to facilitate that conversation. And whoever wants to go and talk about that gets to go talk about that. And then we come back together and kind of report back. What were some of the insights that came out? It's fabulous. It's just fabulous.
Mm-hmm. Laura, you mentioned there's a word you used that ties to something else you were saying. You used the word culture. And in a moment ago, described the triangle, and that there's a large base of newer teachers, and then you have the people who've been doing this for longer, let's say. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that there's a change in the cultural dynamic, perhaps the backgrounds of some of the teachers, that perhaps the folks who've been doing this the longest may have come to this through the tradition, or at least there's a higher number that seem to have that kind of background.
Yeah.
And that more and more I'm seeing people who are coming to this who don't have that at all. And they may be interested in it. And so they're kind of coming in the other way.
Right.
And what that's like, because there are more clinical folks.
Yes.
More of that. I'm wondering what your experience is.
Well, I mean, it seems like there's kind of a level of MBSR teachers that have been teaching longer than I have, and they have kind of maybe figured out their support networks prior to. They're certainly invited. And as I'm thinking about some of the folks that are in some way, shape, or form leading this charge. In fact, many of them are people who have a long-term practice of some years. We do have newer teachers that are coming in that may or may not have come in through that way, and they are sort of maybe kind of, oh, I guess I have to do a silent retreat and so I can teach MBSR.
Yeah.
We had initially, I guess because MBSR has that requirement, there is even just at least that much more retreat practice under people's belts. It takes maybe a couple of years to get a couple of week-long silent retreats at least. So in a daily practice, get that going.
Yeah.
When we started the gathering, we at some point had it sort of like all comers, any mindfulness teachers, and so there were quite a few people who weren't trained to teach MBSR, who had very little retreat practice at all, if any, and they were kind of out of their depth, frankly. Yet the interest is there. People have real passion. They have benefited from it themselves in some way, want to share. I know I have quite a few my mental health care professionals who come to my MBSR classes, and they want to. It's much easier to give your clients a handout on MBSR or on mindfulness, isn't it, than to really do this practice. It's a lot. It asks a lot of us, doesn't it? So yes, to be forthright about that as far as our culture, right? I'm interested in sharing a culture in which that is of value. I mean, that I see its value in myself and my own practice, my own teaching, my own life, and I'm interested in sharing that with other people.
That's beautifully said. What are some other positive things you'd like to see come out of these efforts?
Some people refer to MBSR as a lineage. I mean, that can sometimes be a hot word. I'm afraid to even say it.
You use the L word here.
The L word. Because of course there are differences, right, in what we're doing.
Yes.
Obviously. And what we're doing is really unique. What we're offering is something that's a benefit. So to have some semblance of a sangha in a way, and I don't know how that how that would look, but what I am seeing is the possibility and the germ of possibility. And what I'm seeing is that there are local groups. We have a Portland MBSR teachers. Our Portland MBSR teachers meet from time to time when we can, or connect, or try to meet each other. New teachers come into town, and we try to get to know each other, so it's not so scary, right? Right? Like, come on. And then statewide, we also try to meet or maintain a little listserv. And so we have Oregon MBSR teachers, and you can throw out a question and say, wow, I've had this difficult time, or hey, I heard about this book, and we can share that kind of information and support. Mm-hmm. And so then regionally, same thing, kind of a regional sangha. And sometimes for some groups or states or cities, it's easier to create that kind of community regionally. There may be some fracture locally in some of the, it just depends on, the how the MBSR community has grown up together or not. And so you can meet with people that are practicing, at some distance from you, and not feel at all like they're a competition, right? A competitor. Mm-hmm. So whatever combination, whatever way this has the potential, I think, to create community and allow us all to benefit from that. I have only ever really benefited from opening my time and energy to other teachers. And so, there was a time that I got really sick and had to, I could call people to fill in for me at a very short notice, and someone could cover my MBSR class. And that, I kind of can't imagine not availing ourselves of that if it's an option. And so this is just a way to make that option available, a structure to kind of help support the growth of something like that. And it is working. It takes a little effort. Certainly depends on who's there and what's happening. But we know how to do this. We know how to open our hearts. We know how to step forward. We know how to be present with one another and be intentional about what we're doing.
So before we get to our an upcoming event, I want to hear more about, was there anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners?
MBSR PNW, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction in the Pacific Northwest, is open to, even if you don't live here, you're welcome to subscribe to the email and be a part of our community. For people who are in Eastern Washington or further in, if there's not something available, feel free to come to the gathering. Feel free to join in. And also, too, if there's anybody kind of out there that is interested and wants to geek out about how to create something like this, I'm more than happy to chat about it for sure and try to figure out. We're just making it up as we go along, but there are ways that it seems to be working, and I think that this kind of energy and this kind of structure might be repeatable. It might be something that could be planted in other places.
Thank you for that offer. I expect to hear from others. So, upcoming events.
The next gathering is going to be in January of 2018. It will be January 25th through the 28th. And so that's a Thursday night through Sunday afternoon. And it'll be at a place called Camp Burton on Vashon Island. So MBSR teachers, people who've done the training and taught at least once, because there is an expectation that you'll be leading something. So it helps if you've at least led something. We're really looking forward to that. And it seems far away, but it's good to just save the date. Everybody who has attended has really just felt like it was a refueling for their practice and their teaching. Yeah.
Wonderful. Laura, thank you so much for all of your efforts and those of your partners who are working with you.
Yes, I am not doing this alone, for sure. So I'm getting lots of help.
So our guest today, Laura Martin. If you'd like to find out more about Laura's work, I have some links on the episode page for this episode. If you're just listening, though, make sure that you go to mbsrpnw.com for mindfulness-based stress reduction teachers of the Pacific Northwest. Laura, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.